live from Discovery Park of America in Union City, Tennessee. This quirky 100,000 square foot museum and 50-acre heritage park looks like it popped right out of a storybook. Inside the museum, you will find 10 galleries that tell stories of science, space, the military, history, art, and so much more. On the 50 acres of inspiration, take a step back in time in the 1800 settlement, walk through lush gardens, and experience other unique exhibits. There are stories all throughout Discovery Park of America that are waiting for you to discover.
Good evening and welcome to this session of the 32nd Annual Southern Festival of Books. We hope you all have been enjoying the festival so far. It's been a really wonderful week, and we are headed into the home stretch with the programming going through this Sunday, the 11th. Very honored to welcome you all to this special session this evening. I'm Tim Henderson with Humanities Tennessee and the Southern Festival of Books staff. And first, really want to take a second to thank all of our sponsors, major sponsors for the Southern Festival of Books, the National Endowment for the Humanities, Metro Nashville Arts Commission, the Ingram Content Group, the Tennessee Arts Commission, the Dollar General Literacy Foundation, the National Endowment for the Arts, Vanderbilt University, and our special book-selling partner this week, Parnassus Books. You will be able to view this session live as it streams on our Attendify-based app, which is the official app of the program, but also it'll be streaming live on Facebook and on our YouTube channel. You can post your questions for the panelists in any of those chat streams, and we will get those questions to them for the final Q&A portion of the program. I want to welcome our special guest tonight in this conversation between Bobbie Ann Mason and Jon Peede. John Parrish Peede is the 11th chairman for the National Endowment for the Humanities. He was confirmed in 2018. He's previously served as Literature Grants Director for the NEA and Director of NEA Operation Homecoming, the Writing the Wartime Experience program, and as the Director of the NEA Big Read program. He served as the publisher of the Virginia Quarterly Review at the University of Virginia, where the magazine expanded its readership to 51 countries. He acquired work from 7 Pulitzer Prize winners and edited interviews with 2 Nobel laureates. Chairman Peede has a BA in English from Vanderbilt University and a master's in Southern Studies for the University of Mississippi. And Chairman Peede, it's an honor to have you with us this evening, and I'll turn the show over to you at this point. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. It's a delight to be here, and a special privilege and honor to have this interview with Bobbie Ann Mason for the Southern Festival of Books. And you mentioned that I went to Vanderbilt, and I remember going downtown. I think I walked downtown in the wonderful festival, and I know we'll be back to that in live experience. And it was Willie Morris's festival, and he had his new book on Faulkner out with William Eggleston, who didn't show for the panel. And at the very end, Willie Morris pointed to the back of the room, and there was Eggleston. He said it was such a pleasure to watch the panel. He just didn't want to participate. He wanted to watch it. So I have wonderful memories of the festival in Nashville and even in the Memphis years. So it's a delight. On behalf of my colleagues at the NEH, I want to say, too, we've been happy to fund it. About $3.5 million of the federal funds from our agency have gone to the festival. And also, Tim, you and your colleagues, your team, the NEH has awarded nearly $31 million to Humanities Tennessee. So and it's well deserved for your impact across the state. So I want to thank you. I want to thank your board chair, Daryl Phillips, and again, all your colleagues. And switching to the reason we're all here, Bobbie Ann Mason. As a fellow Southerner, I've been moved by her work from the time I met it as an undergrad. I had the immense pleasure, too, of working with her some 15 years ago when she offered writing workshops to Marines at Camp Lejeune in North Carolina. This was when there were heavy deployments to Iraq and Afghanistan. And I was running the National Endowment for the Arts project, Operation Homecoming. And she talked to them about the experience of writing literature and the importance of telling one's story. And so that was a deep experience for me and for the troops. And of course, you know her work. Bobbie Ann is an accomplished chronicler of life in rural America. It's slowly changing mix of farms, of shopping malls, of subdivisions, and the ways in which family and community bonds are strengthened and also tested by geopolitical forces that are originating far from her home of Kentucky. Bobbie changed American fiction in almost 40 years ago with Shiloh and Other Stories. And this collection centers on a disabled trucker whose wife rather is trying to adjust to having him around the house. I think we all know that particular feeling. And the story collection won the PEN Hemingway Award. And for those of us who read that, it told us there was a different South, and the South we were always talking about. And that has been the case with book after book throughout her career. She, of course, followed that with her acclaimed novel, In Country, the coming-of-age story of a teenager yearning for knowledge about her father, who died in Vietnam. This, of course, was made into a popular film, and I hope if we have time, Bobbie might talk a little bit about what that film was making meant to her town. She wrote a very powerful memoir, Clear Springs, about her childhood on a dairy farm in Western Kentucky, which was a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize. And today, we have the pleasure of hearing from her, not just about her writing career, but to hear her read from her newest novel, Dear Ann, which also returns to the Vietnam War and also the countercultural California of the 1960s, which is a vivid backdrop for this rumination on grief and regret and the road not taken. Bobbie, the stage is yours.
Oh, hello, John. Thank you. And thanks for bringing up that wonderful time that we spent at Camp Lejeune in South Carolina with the Marines at Camp Lejeune and working with their writing. That was a very special time for me. Thank you. And nice to see you again.
You too.
I thought I would, instead of reading one section, I'll read a few little sections to give you a sense of what the novel is about and who Anne is and where we're going with her. Anne is on a cruise ship in 2017, and she's remembering a time 50 years before, 1967. She's thinking about some letters that she got from her old mentor in college, a guy who had spent time in counterculture California. And she's thinking about California and wondering why she didn't go to California then instead of going to graduate school in upstate New York. So we don't know what her situation is and why she's on a cruise ship, but she's thinking what would have happened if she had gone to Stanford University instead of an upstate New York college. She's thinking her life would have been different. The dread she faced now made her feel like a weather-beaten mariner under a bird's curse. If she had gone to California, she would never have met Jimmy. She could still hardly bear to think about him. But she felt a whir of excitement, an unexpected pleasure in imagining her youth following an alternate path. People always said, "Oh, to be young again, knowing what I know now." Being young again in the 60s, what a blast it would be to start over in California, Wasn't California something of a dream by definition? She could reimagine her life, and Jimmy wouldn't be in it. Or it could have turned out differently with Jimmy. She wouldn't be in this nightmarish mirage on an alien sea. So she starts thinking about Palo Alto, California, and thinking about going to Stanford. The university was at the end of a long avenue lined with lofty palm trees. She drove slowly, the car creeping along as if it too was nervous about the ultimate destination of the cross-country journey. Stanford displayed itself lavishly in front of her, both tantalizing and threatening. The amount of wealth it held in its history was beyond Anne's imagination. The palm trees on either side of her made a path to Xanadu. It took her breath. It was a grand and lonesome place. But she wasn't afraid of being alone. She was afraid of Ivor Withers, the prominent literary critic who would be her advisor. She had heard he was a curmudgeon and rationalist. What would he expect of her? She had made little progress on the reading list, 75 recommended books. There would be a test, but not until next summer. She knew some of the obvious books, The Great Gatsby, Moby Dick, within the list of unknowns, but Humphrey Clinker, Erewhon? She was sure that a more backwards bumpkin had never crossed the threshold of almighty Stanford University. She is there, but she gets these letters from her mother, and they kind of interrupt the narrative of Anne's attempt to imagine herself at Stanford University. Mama writes from Western Kentucky, "Dear Anne, remember Ms. Slocum's boy, Tommy? She got word this week that he got killed over there. Oh, she'll be to bury. She loved that boy. She waited on him hand and foot, raising him without a daddy, and now this. Several on our road are going to make up for Flowers if they ever get him home. Tommy aimed to go to the junior college and learn a trade, but he went off to fight." So Mama is sending letters from the farm, and these letters just appear and as documents in Anne's memory. Anne has lives in an apartment building behind a big house in Palo Alto or Menlo Park. It's not clear. And Pixie, who is Anne's neighbor, and Pixie is from New York, and she's a totally different experience from Anne's. So Anne kind of learns a lot from Pixie. "Anne, you really should be on the pill. Saving yourself for somebody special? That's a scream." Pixie had a cowlick, deep-set eyes, and a hefty but curvaceous shape. Anne learned to shrug artfully at her judgments, but she thought Pixie was harsh and manipulative. The cat, Nicodemus, was similar in temperament. "Sanjay brought me biryani the other night, and I gave him some baklava," said Pixie, propping her feet on her brass-bound steamer trunk, her coffee table. Pixie said, "His family sent him here to become a doctor, but they have a wife lined up for him at home. That was arranged when he was a child. Imagine, now he's in love with this undergrad history major from Wyoming, and he doesn't know what to do." "Do you want to marry him?" asked Anne. "Hell no, I just want to sleep with him." And Anne said, "I've known too many girls who had to get married. I'd be terrified of ending up with the wrong person." Pixie rose from the table and scooped the ragged cat into her lap. Let me recommend a really good gynecologist, she said. For me or for the cat? And Pixie says, the cat has been taken care of. And Anne said, I heard the pill causes heart attacks. And Pixie said, the gynecologist told me they've fixed that. And Anne says, I don't know. Pixie says, think about it. Pixie's bathroom was burgundy like Anne's, but it had a window with a view of the parking strip. The light brightened the murky tile. A swath of lace curtain material was slung across a brass rod. The lace edges were raw. All that time, Mama had spent hemming curtains and working those metal hooks into drape tops, Anne thought. So much work. Why bother? This hunk of lace cut straight from the bolt made a more interesting aesthetic statement. Pixie was saying she wasn't a slave to conformity or pointless labor. You didn't have to hem curtains or mess with drape hooks. Anne felt a little tug in her chest, like the loosening of a tight bra strap. I'm not sure I've read my 5 minutes yet. But I wanted to tell you that this is a love story about Anne and Jimmy. And there's a chapter that begins and on about page 75. And then Jimmy appeared. So he wasn't supposed to be there. She wanted to imagine a story without him, but there he is. And they get together and over literature, and they fall in love. So
literature is a great thing to fall in love over. And I'm going to do a shameless plug. Here's the book, a beautiful book at that. My copy is very much marked up. And I didn't know if you want to read any more sections now or later. If not, I have a series of questions, and
yeah,
we know that we'll have online questions too.
Yeah. Well, if there's time as we go, I might pick a little passage, but go ahead.
Oh, great. Well, first let's start with a new novel. So I was reading reviews of your earlier books, and this was fascinating. And it's a couple of sentences here. This is a review in the New York Times, the year's 1982, so about 40 years ago. It's about the breakout book, Shiloh and Other Stories. So here's the reviewer in the New York Times. Quote, most compellingly, Miss Mason examines in her various truck drivers and cell clerks the dawning recognition, in some cases only a vague worry, of having missed something important, some alternative life more fruitful than the one being led, unquote. So 40 years later, you actually explore an alternative life in your fiction. So talk to us about how you came to do this, how this idea came to you. And it feels very autobiographical here and there too.
Well, that may be a tease. It didn't just come like that. I didn't say, why don't I write a story about what if, why about an alternative life? It evolved from a great many different threads. And one of which was a question I had for myself. What if I had gone to California and instead of the East Coast? And I thought I would write a novel about somebody who went to California, and so I could explore that alternate life. But I thought I would have to go to California to do research. I'd never been set foot on Stanford University campus, and I thought I had to do that. But for a variety of reasons, I didn't get to go to California to research this novel, to find out what it was like at Stanford. I just had to write it with the help of pictures on the internet and maps. And so as I got going on it, I realized that since I hadn't been there and didn't know what it was like, I thought, oh, that's interesting. Maybe Anne hasn't been there either.
Mm.
Maybe she's imagining it. So, there were a lot of different things that went into these discoveries before I realized that this is what I was writing.
And that leads me to a question I had too. I feel your relationship with your characters is very interesting. Sometimes it feels as a reader, if you kind of slow down and pay enough attention, there's almost a tug of war. So in Country, it feels like you're trying to pull the characters toward the wall, toward this moment of reckoning with their past and indeed their present and future. Here in Dear Anne, it's as if the narrator wants to stop time, the work of history, what happened with Jimmy. She's even proposing this alternative ending. So do your characters ever surprise you? Do they end up in a place you never expected the story to go?
Oh, I think that's always true because I don't ever plan how it's going to go. I don't have large movements or notions about it. I really concentrate on the details. So if I'm writing about Anne's neighbor Pixie, I don't really know about Pixie, who she is, but I discover she's making baklava.
Yeah.
And then she has a cat named Nicodemus, and she's defying conventions. She puts a swath of lace on a rod for a curtain,
Yeah.
which is so unconventional and really shocks Anne and opens her eyes.
Yeah, you have such granular details. The floor coverings, the bed, the lamps, beads, the smell of the foods. You really do take us there in a very powerful way with multiple characters. I wanted to shift gears. So there are Southern writers, Faulkner and Robert Penn Warren come to mind, who wrote always, it seems to me, in their fiction with a burden of Southern history present. You're much more subtle in your work. I noticed, though, that at least twice in the book, you circle back to the year 1769. That's the founding of Palo Alto, but also as Daniel Boone is looking upon the Cumberland Gap. And if I can add one more question now on top of that, or observation, Robert Penn Warren, of course, also from Kentucky, he famously, in All the King's Men, he has Jack Burton go to California, to Stanford, I believe, as Warren did. And he talks about trying to escape the awful responsibility of time. So can you just talk about, do you feel a pressure to be a certain type of Southern writer or just an American writer, and that pressure of the weight of Southern history is not as present in this work as other works by you? But and I know I put a lot of questions there together, but I just wonder, particularly bringing Boone together with California, as if Anne could not leave the South behind.
I don't think I ever dealt with the burden of Southern history in the way those other writers did. I don't think I felt the burden of Southern history because I didn't take any history classes. I barely had history in high school, and I didn't take any history classes in college. So the Southern history was quite vague to me. And I think there was so much about the South that I rejected and didn't begin to have any perspective on until I'd lived away quite a while. So I think in a way I was free from those, you call them burdens. I think for some reason I have been preoccupied with the theme of war, or the topic of war. First in Shiloh, about the Southern battleground Shiloh. And you might find it funny. I never went to that battleground, but there was a high school history teacher who I was close friends with many decades, and he always took his history class to Shiloh for a field trip. And he was an authority on the Civil War. And but I didn't take his history class, but I always remember him talking about it. So when I wrote Shiloh, I had to contact him to find out some things about the battleground, and he told me there was a log cabin with a bullet hole in it. So,
so there you go.
Very useful, yeah.
Where
so, anyway, I just have a roundabout answer to your question.
No, that's very straightforward. And where a lot of Southern novelists might put references to the Civil War in, one marker of your work is American popular music is always there. It's very much in the new novel, the music of the 60s. Mm-hmm. I happen to know you're friends with contemporary singers. I've seen you and Bruce Springsteen, or things like this. Talk to me about, is music an important part of your fiction? And for you as a writer, it certainly is for your characters.
I think the characters I write about are usually quite attuned with music because, they just are. The people are. They're listening to the radio in their cars, and the popular music or then the more revolutionary countercultural music expresses what people are feeling, and it's not anything they have to go to school for, and it's not anything a teacher is telling them to do. It's just there, and it's expressive.
Absolutely. And I'll say to our host and to the audience, I see their first questions come up. I'm going to ask one last question for me. I certainly want to make sure we leave time for you to read a passage if you want, and then I'll turn to some of the ones that are coming in through the chat box. And what I want to note too, I'll take us back to Dear Anne. Today in academic circles, there's this phrase, close reading. Frankly, I'm not sure I like the phrase. What they call close reading, I think we just call that reading for the world of the internet and social media. I think it means you're paying attention when you read. But I want to highlight the importance of close reading in your work, because your work's so subtle. And I'll give you an example in the book, and I'll read it. Jimmy makes an observation that Anne doesn't have a TV, and she says, why do I need a TV? It has money. And then this is a quote of their dialogue, 3 exchanges. Anne states, we got a TV when I was in high school, and then later I'd watch it with my daddy and little brother when I came home on breaks. Didn't your mom watch it, Jimmy asked? And she replies, she couldn't see it from the kitchen. And that's so powerful. You don't beat us over the head. You put it in there. It's this little patch in the quilt you're creating. But you illuminate in that one sentence so much about gender roles in the 20th century. Anne's mother lived in the kitchen in a domestic space. And I think one of the triumphs of your short story over the decades is how you give agency to domestic space, to working class people, but also kind of home-centered women in particular. Is that conscious? Did you look at American literature and think, I'm not hearing these people's stories? And
it's again not a deliberate, conscious, intellectual, academic thing to do. I just work with the materials I know and can recognize and think I can do something with. And it has so much to do with sound. And the character of Anne's mother, I always hear my own mother's voice in characters like that. And so she was very important, and I find it very meaningful to translate her voice and put her in the roles she occupied. She gives a lot of life to a lot of the fiction I've written, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. And in that sense, you're very much in a long tradition with your Orwellty and so many others about a sense of place. So I think you've alluded to some of this, but one of the questions that came in is, and you really addressed it. The question was, do you have deep themes in mind for your novels, or do you start with characters? I'll ask a related question as we wait for more questions to come in. You've written a memoir, you've written short fiction, so many novels. You actually wrote a piece of literary scholarship early in your career. How do you decide what genre you're going to work in next?
I usually don't go looking for a book to write. It has to come to me, and it has to be so compelling, or I have to have a buildup of creative energy that propels me to just look at a blank page and wonder what is written there in invisible ink that I could erase and find out. Or if I feel that kind of energy, I just start fooling around with some words or a detail and find out where it leads me. A novel is, of course, a bigger thing, and it's a huge commitment. So I steer clear of ideas for novels. They have to come and hit me over the head.
Yeah. And sometimes, in a rare time in somebody's career, you have a novel that moves beyond just the literary world. And In Country, as a novel, in a film, did that. And I think sometimes for younger people, it's hard to recreate for them that Vietnam wasn't talked about. The films that were being made were Deer Hunter or others, where veterans of that war were not depicted in a very positive way. They weren't depicted as stable. In Country, and if my memory serves, that some of the filming was in your town, if I'm not mistaken. But could you talk a little bit about the reception of that book over the years, and even what it meant to your community?
The topic of Vietnam had been dismissed after the war was ended, but then in the late 70s there was an explosion of books by and about the veterans, and then they got together and got the Vietnam Memorial Wall built in Washington. So in the early 80s, everything was emerging, lots of books. And I was reading those, and the novel came out in 1985, and what's been most meaningful is hearing from some of these veterans who recognized what I was writing about. And I had known of their experiences, again, like not knowing Stanford University. I knew them through reading their books, and there was enough common ground in those books that I could hear their voices. They had a common language that they developed from being in Vietnam, and so it was, again, the sound they made that was their experience and what I could hear.
Yeah. And as we get toward the end here, I wanted to make sure I left you an opportunity if you wanted to read another passage or not.
Well, I could read just a few paragraphs about, I don't know, Jimmy and Ann together. The first time they are physically in bed together at the end, they get the giggles together, which is interesting. And she says, "I'm having such a good time. This is better than the tilt-a-whirl." And he gazed directly into her eyes, and she was searching his face. She didn't remember anything so close and warm. She never had an actual date with him, as she knew the practice. They just fell in together. She couldn't wait to see him, and he seemed thrilled to see her. he called her Snooks. With Jimmy, she felt she was really with someone, not hiding behind questions, not obsessing how she looked or acted. It always startled her when they were peering straight into each other's eyes, his bright blue eyes. "You're really here," she murmured. Okay.
I'm gonna shift gears. I know so many years that I was going to book festivals, I was trying to, learn to write literary criticism or trying to write poems or something. And you always want to know a little bit about the craft of writing. And I sometimes think of something that Flannery O'Connor said. She was once asked about, do we do enough to encourage young writers? And she said something to the effect of, I don't think we do enough to discourage them. And she meant about the difficulty of life and publishing being different from writing and all the things we know. But over the years, you've taught, you've had any number of panels as a writer. Do you have something that stuck with you about the craft of writing? If there's a young writer, somebody trying to write works of fiction, any kind of particular advice?
I always say read books, read fiction. You learn how it works. You learn what is moving, or you learn about how it fits together, how just how the elements of fiction work, from suspense to characterization to metaphors and narrative progression, getting from A to B. If you don't love reading literature, I don't know why you would be needing to write a novel.
Yeah. And by the way, I'm glad in that list you mentioned mystery. I was doing something with the Librarian of Congress, Carla Hayden, and the head of the Institute of Museum and Library Services, Crosby Kemper. And we all three acknowledged liking mysteries. And of course, I mentioned you, Dora Welty, earlier. She loved mysteries. And I think sometimes young writers feel like, oh, you can only read these 1,000-page, highly, dense literary books. And it is about a delight. And speaking of delight, there's a question that's come in from a person named Gianna Quishon, which I thought to ask. Which of your books is your favorite and why?
It's hard to say. There's some I'm closer to. And the fiction, I'm very close to the Nancy Culpeper stories. But I think probably the real favorite is either In Country or The Girl in the Blue Beret.
Yeah.
I just feel very proud of In Country. And The Girl in the Blue Beret has a lot of history, personal connection. So I'm fond of that. And Clear Springs, my memoir, very close to that. But some of the others are just off the top of my head.
Yeah. Well, and I showed the other book earlier. I'm just going to shamelessly, I'm going to be like your agent. Rarely does a writer, you can see how thick this is, rarely does a writer get a reader. And this is from Kentucky with another author, we're intro by another author we're going to hear. And on the one hand, going through this just made me want to stop and read the whole novel. But it really is a great piece. And that it includes your interviews, I think is a wonderful
image. That's called Patchwork, and it's a collection of a lot of different pieces and stories and excerpts, and it's from the University Press of Kentucky. Yeah,
which I much commend. And well, we're getting to our last few minutes. Another question I'm always somewhat interested in is who's of writers that are still active today, or frankly, for that matter, I guess of any time period, are there writers whose work has meant a lot to you over time? I'll remove the limit on contemporary because I know everybody worries about leaving out a friend, but somebody's work that appeals to you as a reader or a writer over time.
Well, my old favorites who probably influenced me the most were from way back in graduate school and college. Fitzgerald, Hemingway, and then as an undergraduate, and then in grad school, I discovered Joyce and Nabokov, who are the two writers that taught me the most about writing. But although you wouldn't see any similarity, maybe, to my writing, but they're the ones who gave me, all those writers gave me a model to aspire toward. There was a greatness there that I knew I would never get close to, but still, there was a reason to aspire and to learn from them.
I think you don't have to worry about not getting close to their excellence. I think that's was well covered. And one part about your book, and of course I know your academic work on Nabokov early in your career, is when you talked about winners at Stanford in the new novel, you are bringing a lot of us back to the idea of grad school and the anxiety of it. And this person's read more than I have, and winners at the end of that, maybe the height and the end of the new critical system that was in vogue when you were in school, was certainly in the vogue when I was an undergrad and in grad school. It was that drawing on your own lived experience, some of those the emotional terrain,
the emotional threat that I felt in every class, and what it was like to be in school. I don't know that much of it is particularly drawn. There are a couple of incidents where Anne is very embarrassed by something she says when she speaks up in class. And I do remember a version of that in my own experience.
Yeah, I think we all remember that feeling that we had said something that was off, let's say, and that everybody else somehow had all the answers.
Oh yeah, you feel that from first grade, I think.
I think so too. Maybe that's maybe this is a good reminder that we can write our way through that anxiety. I know we're at the last minute or two here, and they want to keep these moving. I just want to say it's a wonderful new novel. It's a deeply imaginative work, and like all great imaginative work, is grounded in details. So I'm going to give you the last word here, and I have a few closing credits and acknowledgments I need to make. But thank you so much, Bobbie.
Well, thank you. You're giving me the last word, or?
Well, sure. And then I'm going to say a few credits, but what I would say, when you were finishing this book, I don't know at what time you finished this, and when the pandemic hit, but there was an experience of reading it where she's in isolation on this cruise ship. And of course, we're all reading it in our own kind of levels of isolation. And
she thinks about the norovirus.
Yes. And I just wondered, when you finished the book, were these narratives starting to kind of collapse together, or had you sent it off for final editing before the pandemic?
It was all done before the pandemic, but I would add that it was not quite done when I got an opportunity exactly a year ago to go to Palo Alto and visit the Stanford campus and learn about the trees there and see the great El Palo Alto redwood tree that Palo Alto is named for, and it gets its own scene in this novel.
It does. That's a lovely scene. Well, I think ending on the beauty of that and on trees in general is just a good point to end on. So thank you so much for sharing your words and your thoughts with us. It's really been a pleasure.
Oh, thank you, Jon. This has been lovely.
Yeah, well, thank you. Well, I certainly want to thank the festival and I know the audience, which is at home, thanking you for a captivating discussion. And more importantly, thanking you, Bobbie, for your voice. So every writer creates characters, but you let them speak, and that makes all the difference in the world.
Oh,
So,
well, thank you.
so thank you.
Thank you to the viewers and the festival and everybody involved. And I hope you all come and see some more of these sessions at the festival.
Great. And lastly, I want to thank Parnassus Books, which is a sponsor of the Festival of Southern Books, and it helps keep these events free, whether they're online or the years it's in person. You can buy Bobbie Ann Mason's new novel, Dear Ann, at Parnassus, the links at the book festival. So thank you, everyone. Be well and good night.
Thank you. Good night.